Thank you for all of you making it out in this terrible weather. We have a colleague who's from Wisconsin who can't believe how hysterical we get over a day like this. It's regularly snowed in, but I know for Aucklanders like me, it's quite terrifying to go out there when the wind hits a few miles an hour. So today, as Vanya said, I'm a user of data. I use it for building algorithms to identify children at risk of harm, for identifying people at risk of homelessness. All my work is really concentrated in the US at the moment, with some interest in other parts of the world. There hasn't really been anything that I've worked on in implementation in New Zealand. But in New Zealand context, I've been part of a group who in the last 3 years have been trying to understand how New Zealanders feel about not algorithms, but more broadly the use of their data. And we've been working with Toi Aria, which is a Centre for Social Design and Public Policy, and Tahuna Trust, which is a Maori research group, looking at how New Zealanders feel about their data use, and then taking that and basically converting them into a set of guidelines that people, organizations, both commercial and public sector organizations, can use to figure out how to improve their data use. And so we started with this concept of social license. And so what we call a social license for the data use is that when people trust that their data will be used as they agree, except that enough value will be created, they're likely to be more comfortable with its use. So we are going beyond the regulatory framework to a more kind of softer, more dynamic idea of social license. And really the number one question and challenge we have to organizations out there who are using people's data, which today is everyone, including universities, do we have social license for how we're using our clients, our students, our partners, our workers' data? Do we have social license for that? And so this talk is really about trying to help untangle that. That's a complex question. It's trying to help us walk through how could we know if we had social license, and if we feel we don't, how could we get it? So it starts with this idea that we can comply with the Human Rights Commission, we can comply with the Office of Privacy Commission, we can comply with all the legislation out there, but the use of data is moving so fast that we could easily be doing everything by the book, ticking all the, having the TNCs, having everything exactly as we had done for 20 years, and find that this is what happens to our share price. This is kind of what puts the fear into lots of organizations' hearts, is the fact that you can do everything by the book. And here is Facebook share price climbing steadily, and this is what happened to Facebook share price the day when Cambridge Analytica news broke. And that Cambridge Analytica news broke because a guy who had been working in this business for 4 years, or for three or 4 years, not said anything, finally said something. So for organizations out there, who is sitting in their business right now who knows about a data use and is going to announce it and take away billions of the share price? And this is the guy who was the researcher, like you and like many of us. At the time, Kogan was one of the co-founders of the scientists behind the Cambridge Analytica work. He said, honestly, we thought we were acting perfectly appropriately. We thought we were doing something that was completely normal. So they were doing everything by the book, and yet what they were doing was amazingly uncomfortable for people. So what we find is what this tells us is that Cambridge Analytica and Facebook The Privacy Commission now in lots of countries is now trying to find out, did they really do things by the books or have they done something illegal? Let's just put that to one side. Suppose the terms and conditions that you and I and all of us on Facebook had signed is said, yes, we are perfectly happy when we accept an app, like a live skills app or whatever, for our data and our private messages to be sent to a third party. Suppose we had signed that. How many of us have actually read the terms and conditions we signed? Do we know if we had said it was okay? We might easily have said it was okay. And so after the review of all these different officers of privacy, they might actually say Facebook was fine, they did what the law required. That is not going to see an uptick in their share price for sure, because what they didn't have is social license. So that's what Trusted Data Guidelines is trying to get at. And here, closer to home, is an agency which is a public sector agency with the Ministry of Social Development, MSD, that didn't have social license for what they were trying to do. Again, they did, as I understand, a privacy impact assessment. They had ticked the boxes, but they didn't have the social license to go and require the people that they paid as part of their contracts to give them MSD back individual client level information. Now, at first glance, you think, what? This Ministry of Social Development is contracting with a subgroup, with an agency. Red Crisis Center, Women's Refuge, some other agency. MSD is paying them to look after clients. Surely MSD has a right to know who is being looked after. MSD has the right to know who these clients are so that they can audit them. They can make sure that, just standard credentials are being looked after. What society said is that they might have, if they had made the case. MSD did not make the case. And that is what gave them the huge pushback. So I think both of these would have benefited greatly from the transparency and trust that you can get through guidelines. Yeah?
When you say made the case, do you mean made the case at the point at which the person entered the system?
Or at the point at which they had asked for the client level data.
Because the client can only give that data to the client.
Absolutely. So imagine if the MSD had said to the client, you are our client, but your services are paid for by this third party MSD. Here is an information sheet telling you exactly why MSD needs your data, what they'll do with it, how they'll protect it, whether you can ask them to tell you what information. Imagine if that's what the interaction was. And before that, imagine if MSD had gone and consulted with all the NGOs, asking them, how would you feel? What should be in this information sheet? How should we manage that? Should there be a governance body of all the NGOs to look after how this data is used? Imagine if that was the world in which this thing was asked for. That's what the Trusted Data Guidelines are trying to get at. It's not often what people are trying to do that's a problem, it's the process that they've followed to get there. And what we're trying to push is a process. So how did we get to the process? The process we got to in a kind of deliberative democracy way, which is we went and worked with some fantastic partners, Toi Aria and Massey University, Takuna Trust, and they went out and asked New Zealanders and Maori, how did they want, what questions did they want answered? And that wasn't the question they asked, clearly. What they did is they had 27, this is Toi Aria, had 27 workshops, 6 in Auckland. The size of those dots tell you how many there were. So they had, from Invercargill to Whangarei, they had workshops, lots of workshops in the big cities, smaller workshops. The workshops brought into a room about this size, about this number of people. The people invited were supposed to be both a cross-section of New Zealand society, but with an oversampling of the kinds of people who might be more likely to have their data used and matched and merged. So there was an emphasis on working homeless people, people who were on benefits, Pacifica, people who were from small communities. We looked at Asian New Zealanders. So there was a lot of emphasis on what one would, the kinds of communities who might be more impacted upon by the MSD type proposal. And what they did is, it was quite amazing, and I went to a couple of these. They come into the room and they would read a scenario, and a scenario might look like this. You hear that your primary school is introducing a new online system for all students' reports, communications between teachers, parents, and caregivers. Student information will be transferred between primary, secondary, and tertiary organization to produce a continuous lifelong learning report. So they're saying, you'll hear this from your school. This will be accessed by caregivers and parents, by students, and obviously by the school system. So what they then did is they rolled out a carpet about a fifth of the size of this. And all the people would go and place themselves on the carpet, depending on how much benefit they thought there was from this data use, and how much trust they had in this data use. So something like, in fact, surprisingly, we did Internet of Things like smart street lighting, your medical records, and your education records. And funny enough, people from the education one were most challenging. We thought health would be the things that New Zealanders cared about the most, but they were really quite concerned about sharing education data. So New Zealanders, the people at the workshop, would put themselves, some would feel very comfortable, some would feel uncomfortable, and notice that the comfort was sort of in two axes, the benefit and the trust. And we come back to that again and again. One of the principal ways to communicate your data use to your clients, your consumers, your community, your stakeholders is the benefit that it has, not just for the client, the community who's giving you the data, but the benefit it has to New Zealanders, the benefit it has to you as a company, and the trust, the things that you will do to protect them, and the trust. So people put themselves on this map, and then they were asked to have a conversation about why they were there. And then the most important thing is they were asked to have a conversation about what things they want to know that would move them away from the very uncomfortable towards the comfortable. What questions would they have to have answered by these schools? What would they need assurances about? And that's, I'm sorry that, so overall, what things would increase your comfort in sharing and use of your data? And they would sticker board them, and every one of these 27 workshops got you about 10 of these big sticker boards. And from that, our research partners summarized it into 8 key questions that came up again and again as what people would want answered. And the Data Futures Working Group also felt that it wasn't enough to stop at the 8 key questions. We think that there was also a good case to be made for a process that an organization could go through. Because we, as a group, went around and gave these 8 key questions to agencies and prototyped them. And what we heard from them is it wasn't enough for them to have the questions. They also wanted to know what process should they follow. Like if you go back to your desk today and say to your colleagues, we've got to clean up our data use, what is it that the Data Futures partnership thinks you should do from day one? And here's the process. So here are the questions, and then I'll go through the process. So the questions are a data wheel, and they're in your Path to Social license. We have a website, and that address is in there, that you can go to and start filling out your data wheel yourself. So the data wheel is basically questions, which are kind of broadly protection, choice, and value. To be honest, I think people can remember 8 questions. I don't know why we need to group them. So just take it as me. There's just 8 questions. Who will be using my data? First question. So Facebook should have said, if they had filled this data deal, we'll be using your data, and Cambridge Analytica will be using your data. What are the benefits and who will benefit? Well, just be honest. We'll benefit because it'll help us target customers better and allow us to approach you for marketing. You'll benefit because some of the data we're collecting is necessary for services. So you tell people how they'll benefit. You benefit because you get free Wi-Fi access at this airport, and that's the benefit you get. We get your information to help us target future advertisements to you. So what we found is people aren't stupid. They know that they're going to be targeted. They know they're going to get marketing. Just be honest and transparent, and then they can decide. What will my data be used for? And for data use, we sort of suggest 3 types of data users. The first is data that is necessary to make this thing work for you. So a really good example of data that isn't necessary is one of the people we were talking to said he bought a smoke alarm. And the smoke alarm was a smart smoke alarm and needed some data. But it also wanted him it needed him to sync with his iPhone so that he could get an alert in his iPhone to say the smoke alarm had gone off. That all made sense. What didn't make sense is it also needed to sync with his contact details of his phone numbers and contact people. And he went back to the vendor and said, why do I have to sync it with my list of contacts? They couldn't answer it. Clearly it was because it was trying to get more data than was needed by the service for some marketing purpose. The interesting thing is that he was unable to use the smoke alarm unless he synced it with the list of phone numbers, the contact. So one of the things we suggest is that vendor or the smoke alarm supplier should have said, here is the data we need from you to make the smoke alarm work like it's supposed to. Here's additional data we want from you. Great practice is to say, if you want, you can actually opt out of the additional data. But if you want, you can opt in because we will use it to target marketing at you. But our suggestion is you split it into data that's needed and data that's not needed. Is my data secure? That's a pretty obvious answer. Will my data be anonymous? And what we found is that people aren't stupid. They know that even though you might have removed first name, last name, surname, your usage pattern in your social media, those are all identifiable. And people from New Zealand, they said, well, we're in a small community. It's really easy to identify people. So we don't need you to tell us a long story about why it's anonymous, and we have some wording in there. It says something like, we will try to keep your data anonymous. Here are the things we will do if there is a data breach. Here are other things that we will do to make sure that more sensitive data is not shared at all. So there is a kind of acknowledgement that we don't know how anonymous it can be. If it's not sensitive data, you might get away with being quite broad. If it's highly sensitive data, for example, health records, education records, mental health service records, you might need to assure a high level of anonymity or ensure that if you want to be seen as getting a good response. Can I see and correct data about me? Could my data be sold? Now there was quite a bit of, people had a strange juxtaposition in their attitude to the private sector. Banks typically were one of the most trusted in terms of how they looked after data. Yet, when it came to having their data unsold for profit, people were very uncomfortable. So it was a sort of strange kind of attitude that people had to the private sector. a slight paradox, but you can understand why. One is kind of breaches in banking. Either we don't hear of it or there are very few. We hear a lot more breaches in government data. But I guess there's a kind of sense of it's my data and someone else is exploiting it to make profit. What am I seeing as a benefit? So people might be quite comfortable for people to say, we're a data broker, we do sell your data, but because of that, we can offer you these free services. We can offer you free access to Facebook, free access to Spotify, free access to Netflix, because we sell your data. Will I be asked for consent? And again, consent is not always necessary. If you're not giving personal information, it might be that the law doesn't require you to be able to consent. And it's very easy and simple to say, no, law doesn't require us to consent. We're not going to ask for consent. Move on to the next bit. So I think if you look at the guidelines, you'll see that the guidelines are quite open about what the right answer is. There is no right and wrong answer. There is law, and everything else, everyone can do whatever they want to do. But in between that is people who care about their brand value, care about data use, who are worried about doing the right thing, and that's where the guidelines sit. So that's the 8 key questions. Here is how the 8 key questions work in a typical organization. So we have, I have prototyped this with some private and public sector agencies. And so the first thing to do, and I would really urge you to do that, is to do a stock take of data use in your organizations. And take all those, or if there are too many, take a few of them and get the people who are running those data use projects to answer the 8 questions. Because I think what you'll find is when people start answering the 8 questions and saying out loud what they're doing, they might themselves feel uncomfortable. They might not need to go beyond and look through our guidelines to say, is this acceptable to New Zealanders or not? They might find, actually, it's not even acceptable to us. Because what we've found in big organizations is there's a huge uprising of data use. We're being sold dashboards and predictive algorithms from, and all parts of our organization are hiring, analysts or data scientists who are going off and doing their own thing, and it's great, but CEOs need to start getting on top of what these people are doing and getting on top of it, because it's going to come back to bite them. Typically, CEOs have been working as they're the geek team. They do geeky stuff. Once in a while, a little tool pops up. The tool gets used by marketing or someone over here, and they say it's improving our market targeting by 20%. It's decreasing wastage of lost opportunity by 5%. It's not changing our business a huge amount, but it seems to be valuable. And it might be the thing that becomes the front page of the newspaper shortly. So all I'm saying is go up there, do a stock take, and get them to answer the key questions. What we suggest is the agency self-assesses the acceptability of its answers, and then asks itself, if it's not acceptable, go back and think about a new use case or how to modify it. If it's novel, is that the time? Sorry, I mentioned. If it's a novel data use, so we want to ask, have other people done similar things? So what we mean is, if you might not be the first bag who's taking data and doing something with it, maybe another competitor has done exactly the same thing, its customers knew about it, it's been doing it for years, everyone seems comfortable, this is not a novel data use, then you're not in the space of needing to consult. So our suggestion is, if it's a novel data use, then and it's not a novel data use, it's just something you've always done, everyone's kind of known you always did it, then just display the 8 answers to the 8 questions on your website or wherever, and just leave it there so that people can go and have a look to see what you're using your data for what. If it's a novel data use, then, and it's in one of the low trust groups, that is if it's people who people from vulnerable communities, people who have for whom it will be a serious impact. So if these are high-stakes decisions, whether a person's going to get a loan for their house or not, are high-stakes decisions. If it's high-stakes decisions being made by an algorithm, then we suggest you go out and speak to stakeholders, speak to the type of representatives from consumer groups, speak to the Financial Market Authority, speak to them about what you're doing, and start understanding whether what you're doing and how you're using people's data has got social license. If it's not, then, so in these cases, we suggest you do active consultation with stakeholder groups. So that's kind of it. I'm sorry I left it. How long was I going to talk about? Oh, 1 hour. Sorry, yes, 1 hour. That's all right. So I'm not. So this is kind of the schema of the process. This is the key questions, and it's really predicated on the idea that things are moving too fast for us to legislate right now. So what we think in New Zealand, to make New Zealand a leader in trusted data use, and we can because we're a small community with very high trust values across our whole sector. So given that, our comparative advantage could be a very high trust, high use data ecosystem. But to do that, the best way to do it is through transparency and being really open and making sure that those transparency settings don't hinder creative and important and innovative uses of data, but don't leave the community behind, because if people are rushing ahead to use data in ways that they haven't got social license to, at some point the democratic system is going to come and bite you in the backside, and we're going to end up with legislative, sort of fell-arm of legislation. And the worry, if that happens too early, there's two things. One is we could end up in a suboptimal place. We might legislate away from things that would improve our situation. And the other thing is legislation could stymie innovation. And it's an open question about whether GDPR is going to do that or not. But GDPR is an example of how people have reached for legislation without actually fully knowing the implications of that for an innovative, forward-thinking use of AI and other technologies. So from the Data Futures the Data Futures group, and from my personal research area, I really think the best thing to do is to try as much as we can and as fast as we can to build a trusted data ecosystem in the country, and that is community-led, that addresses community concerns,